Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Lost Years of Merlin series. This is chapter 13 of the 7 Songs of Merlin called Strange Bedfellows. In chapter 12, Merlin, Rhea, and Bumblebee went to Tuatha's grave and he talked to him about the 7 songs again and gave him some advice. So, Strange Bedfellows. As I emerged from the glade, the trees fell eerily silent again. I clung tight to my staff, aware that it, like myself, had been touched by the spirit of Tuatha, and that it, like myself, would never be quite the same. Rhea and Bumblebee came toward me as I stepped out of the cedars. Although they walked side by side, the contrast between them could not have been starker. One, who moved with the liveliness of a young fox, wore the greenery of the forest. The other, as stiff and glum as a tree stump, wore a heavy brown cloak and, of course, a hat of drooping bells. Yet both, at least for now, were my companions. Rhea reached for me, wrapping her forefinger around my own. "What did you learn?" I squeezed her finger. "A little. Only a little." "That won't be enough," said Bumblebee. "Nothing is ever enough." "Oh, where do we go now?" asked Rhea, glancing at the darkening boughs behind me. Chewing on my lip, I pondered the first of the 7 songs. Well, I must somehow find the soul of the art of changing, and to do that, I need to find a treeling. The lesson changing be the first, a treeling knows it well. I caught my breath. "But didn't you say that Quinn was the last of the treelings?" She nodded, her face grim. I could tell that she felt even now the sting of Quinn's treachery. She was the last, the very last, and she's most likely gone too. Probably bled to death after that goblin sliced off her arm. I spun the staff's gnarled top in my hand. But then how can I find the soul of the song? It has something to do with the treelings. Rhea ran her hands through her curls. "You do have a taste for challenges, Merlin. Your only hope is to go to Fair Olana, the treelings' ancestral home. I don't think you will find much there, though." "How far is it?" "Far. All the way to the southwestern tip of Finkyra, and we'll have to cross the full length of the Druma, which will slow us down more. The only way to avoid that would be to cut across the misted hills to the coast, then head south, but that means passing through the land of the living stones. Not a wise idea." Bumblebee's head jangled in agreement. "Sound advice, young woman. The living stones have an uncanny appetite for travelers," he gulped, wiggling his layered chins. "Especially jesters, I understand." "They must have strong stomachs," I added sardonically. Facing Rhea, I asked, "That's the region where the Grandalusa lives, isn't it?" Bumblebee shuddered. "Another excellent reason to avoid it. Even the living stones are afraid of that gargantuan spider. Her appetite is worse than theirs. Far worse." I drew a deep breath of air, scented by the boughs surrounding us. "All the same, Rhea, I want you to take us the shorter way, through the misted hills." Both the girl and the jester started. Even the silent cedars jostled their branches, seeming to gasp. Rhea leaned toward me. "Are you serious?" "Completely." I pushed the hair off my brow. "If we can save a day, or even an hour, it could be worth my mother's life." Bumblebee, his frowns carved deep into his face, grabbed the sleeve of my tunic. "You mustn't do this. Those hills are deadly." I pulled free. "If you would rather stay here with Tuatha, go right ahead." As his eyes opened to their widest, I struck my staff on the needle-strewn ground. "Let's go." We left the shadowed glade, trekking through the marshy terrain. Except for the steady rattle of Bumblebee's bells, we moved in silence. At least, I thought grimly, the Grandalusa will hear us coming. But would we hear her? And would she hold back her appetite long enough to remember that she had once welcomed Rhea and me as guests in her crystal cave? My legs felt weak at the thought of her slavering jaws. As our feet squelched through the muddy soil, the trees thinned and I noticed more landmarks. An odd, chair-shaped boulder splotched with yellow lichen, the twisted skeleton of a dead tree, a patch of flaming orange moss, a strange, triangular pit. In the deepening dusk, more water seeped into the soil, as well as our boots. Soon, I heard frogs piping in the distance. Birds joined the chorus, crying in eerie voices. The dank, rotting smell grew stronger. Before long, we arrived at the edge of a wide stretch of tall grasses, dead trees, and dark pools of quicksand. The swamp. Waving two mud-splattered sleeves, Bumblebee protested. "We're not going across that now, are we? It's almost nightfall." "Either we camp here," I replied, "or find some drier ground in the hills. What do you think, Rhea?" She pulled a handful of purple berries off a low bush and popped them into her mouth. Still sweet. "Rhea?" "Drier ground," she answered at last, "though the berries here are tasty." As the cry of the swamp crane echoed hauntingly from the shadows, Bumblebee shook his head. "A lovely choice. Spend the night in a swamp and get strangled by deadly snakes, or at the Grandaloosa's doorstep and get eaten as her breakfast." "The choice is yours," I started off, leaping over a rotting log. I landed with a splash in a puddle. Seconds later I heard two more splashes, along with bells and a lot of grumbling behind me. For a while I followed a strip of caked mud that pointed like a finger into the marsh, yet that soon faded away, making it necessary to slog straight through the grassy pools. Sometimes I sank into the water up to my thighs. Long, blackened fingers of submerged branches clutched at my tunic, while mud oozed into my boots. And every so often, strange shapes stirred in the unknown depths. The light waned steadily. Tonight there would be no moon. However, for thick clouds had rolled in, obscuring the sky. Just as well, I told myself. Seeing the moon would remind me all the more of my vanishing time, as well as hope. We pushed on in the near darkness. After another hour of slogging and splashing, all light vanished. A snake hissed somewhere near my boot. I began to fear that we had somehow veered off course. The murk seemed to stretch on endlessly. My legs felt heavier and heavier. Then, little by little, the terrain began to grow more solid under my feet. At first, I hardly noticed the change, but in time I could tell that we were climbing gradually onto rocky ground. The rotten pools disappeared, as did their smell. The cries of frogs and birds faded behind us. We had crossed the swamp. Exhausted, we stumbled into a level clearing surrounded by boulders. I declared it our camp for the night. In unison, we flopped down on the mossy ground. To warm my cold hands, I slid them into the opposite sleeves of my tunic. My eyes closed, and I fell asleep. I awoke when a large drop of rain splashed on my nose. Another drop came, and another. A cloud on the horizon flashed suddenly with light, and thunder rumbled above the ridge. The downpour began. Rain pelted us, driven by the rising wind. The night grew even darker, as if the clouds had condensed into great slabs of rock. Waves of water poured down from the sky. Even if I could somehow have changed into a fish, I'd have been no wetter. All I needed now was gills. Shivering from the cold, I moved closer to one of the boulders, hoping to find at least a little shelter. That was when I realized that the boulder was moving closer to me. "Living stones!" cried Rhea. "We've got to get—" "Aye!" screamed Bumblebee. "It's eating me!" I tried to roll away from the boulder, yet the shoulder on my tunic was caught, holding me fast. I tugged on it, trying to break loose. As water streamed down my face, I pounded my fist against the stone. My fist hit the wet rock, and stuck there. It wouldn't budge. Then, to my horror, the rock started closing in around me, swallowing my whole hand with lips of stone. I shrieked, but a clap of thunder drowned out my voice. In the blackness, in the torrent, I fought with all my strength to pour free. Soon the stone had consumed my whole hand, then my wrist, my forearm, my elbow. Hard as I kicked and squirmed, I could not get away. Though I could still feel my fingers and hand, the pressure on them was increasing steadily. In no time, my bones would disintegrate, crushed in the jaws of a living stone. A sudden flash of lightning brightened the ridge. In that instant, a huge, hulking figure, broader than the boulders themselves, entered the clearing. Its voice, louder even than the thunder, rose above the storm. "Hungry!" bellowed the great beast. "I am hungry!" "The Grandaloosa!" shouted Rhea. Bumblebee screamed again, the scream of a man about to die. In a single leap, the Grandaloosa landed at my side, her 8 legs splattering mud in all directions. Despite the rain and the darkness, my second sight could not miss her massive jaws opening. As I glimpsed the endless rows of jagged teeth, I struggled all the harder to escape. The jaws closed. But not on me. With a terrific crunch, the Grandaloosa took an enormous bite out of the living stone itself. The boulder shuddered violently, then released my arm. I tumbled backward onto the muddy ground. Before I knew what was happening, someone fell on top on top of me as a blast of white light seared the ridge. Okay, so that was chapter 14, nope, 13. And tomorrow we will read chapter 14. Have a good night.